The word horror will always be one of the more difficult ideas to convey and to express, and an even harder feeling to share. Nowadays, movies, television shows, and even video games all have their own take on what the definition of horror really is. And one of the more popular, more visceral identities to this medium is the infamous franchise known only as Resident Evil. On the date of March 22nd, 1996, Japan first made Resident Evil, or rather Biohazard, known to the general populace. But it wasn't until March 30th of the same year that Capcom first breathed life for the title, Resident Evil. Its popularity was unfathomable, and it was only the first stepping stone into a legacy that would be embedded forever into the PlayStation's lifespan for years. Resident Evil 2 was eventually released approximately 2 years later in 1998 of the same month of January in both Japan and in North America. This sequel, this self-proclaimed second chapter in the life of Raccoon City, was even more astounding than its predecessor. Everything that the first game had engineered, the second installment only built upon even more. From the gameplay, to the story, to the game design, Resident Evil 2 was without a doubt a PlayStation classic and one of the greatest PlayStation games of all time. Its popularity only skyrocketed the series' name even further, and would eventually come to leave a legacy for gamers alike. Now, fast forward to today. Capcom has finally decided to give ear to the pleading cries of loyal fans, all begging for a remake to the favorite classic. It took long enough, and after enough haunting moans from the hungry masses, the world caught wind of a Resident Evil 2 remake on August 12, 2015. It's been over a decade later, and the game, more or less, holds up to today's standards. Now, the only question that remains is, do we truly need a remake to the horrific tales of Ancient's past? Today, we will be exploring Resident Evil 2 then and now to see exactly what is it that has retained fan popularity through the years and find out whether or not this game truly deserves to live inside the dark closets of gamers today and frighten them once more. Resident Evil 2 was a survival horror video game that pitted one of two playable characters against the forces of the undead. If you had the courage to last the night and to survive some of hell's most insane and grotesque creatures, then you would eventually live to see the light of day once again. The emphasis on survival was huge, as ammo, health items, and resources were all scarce and needed to be extricated by you, the player. It was a game unlike any we've seen, especially in the horror genre. It was because of this need to survive is what pushed Resident Evil to be different. Unlike traditional games with weaponry promoting hunting down monsters or different enemies, Resident Evil pushed the idea of trying not to fight every single enemy on the screen, as this would of course use up too much ammunition and health. Instead, the drive was to learn how to use resources wisely only when needed, while dodging and avoiding minions of the undead. It were these core gameplay elements that defined the survival horror genre, and separated it from other platforms of gaming. It was an intriguing and completely different concept for gamers, as the idea of trying to evade certain battles and conserve your gunfire was an idea that was counterintuitive to the general playstyle of video games. But again, that was the drive and challenge of the series. The reward stemmed from the success of fending off a room full of zombies unscathed without having to deal a single blow, or having just the right amount of shots necessary to defend yourself from a sudden liquor attack. Not to mention the satisfaction from dispatching an extremely tough boss by accumulating and collecting the right amount of ammo was one of the greatest feelings a player could achieve with a game like Resident Evil. Though the concept has practically faded by today's standards, Resident Evil 2 abided by the good old style of using save points and having to restart at said point if the player had died. An olden game concept for sure, and yet its effects were still a nice touch to the flow of the gameplay. If a player had not saved for a good while, the punishment was having to backtrack a few minutes to at least an hour, recovering their last endeavors. But what makes Resident Evil stand out in this sense of gameplay is its ability to teach the player in order to improve their skills. Sure, it seems simple enough to save more often, but the ink ribbons needed to create a save were limited. Not to mention that the game rewards you by the end with a higher score depending on how many saves you had made, as well as how fast the game was completed. Redfield, younger sibling to one of the stars of the first game, Chris Redfield, a survivor of the zombie-infested mansion, wanders into town looking for her older brother, unaware of the nightmares that foreboded the streets. Simultaneously, a rookie cop by the name of Leon Kennedy had just stumbled into town as well after transferring to his new position at the Raccoon City Police Department. The fate of these two would eventually align, as they became nothing but a hunting game for the masses of the undead. Both Claire and Leon would eventually come to separate ways as they trekked through the city and discovered some hidden, gruesome secrets about Umbrella, the pharmaceutical company responsible for the creation of the T-Virus along with its hellish spawn. Its plotline was built in order to bridge these two characters' story arcs, and eventually bring them back together in the end. Along the way, they would meet Ada Wong, a secret spy working for an Umbrella in order to obtain a sample of the G-Virus, a much more powerful and deadlier concoction than the T-Virus, and Annette Birkin, the woman responsible for the G-Virus, as well as marrying her husband William, one of the game's demonic antagonists. Though Resident Evil had never been too story-driven, what it did deliver was still more than enough to create a sense of purpose and dread for the player as they took control of two people who could very well be the last human beings able to survive the supernatural massacre and live to tell the tale to the world. In the realm of game design, there was always one thing Resident Evil had always done right, and those were the pre-rendered backgrounds and scenery used in order to create its eerie backdrop. The ambiance was superbly designed for the player as you unknowingly explored room after room, with God knows what lurking behind each door. Destinations such as a bloody hallway, to a tiny corner with a mob of the undead waiting for you, to the safe haven of the save room. Resident Evil 2 had a way of painting every room it generated with a sense of being, and drew its contrast between each of them in a way that created a feeling of true horror. In the graphical sense, the characters and everything else were less blocky this time around as compared to the first one. Zombies were made to look a little more realistic and even added more color and clothing swaps in order to generate some variety among the victims of Raccoon City. Resident Evil 2 overall was brilliantly designed, and whether or not you are a fan of this title, there's no denying the amount of effort put into a simple horror game about zombies. Its improvement from the first installment was one that was much appreciated, and its placing among the community of PlayStation lovers and video gamers were of high ranking. Selling 380,000 copies and grossing a total of $19 million, Resident Evil 2 was certainly marking its territory as one of the greatest hits in video gaming. Its gameplay is superb, thought out, punishing yet rewarding, and overall, evil. A game such as Resident Evil 2 is quite definitely not for the faint of heart. And if by today's standards this game were to be remade for the new generation of gaming platforms, Resident Evil 2 would, without a doubt, break the barrier once again for the meta of survival horror. Of course, all of this could only happen if done correctly, and only if Capcom truly wants to stick to the original bewitching spirit that possesses Resident Evil 2.